distinguished lecturer of SSP 24. Tonight's panel on commercial lunar landers will share how their companies are developing technologies and supporting markets for extraterrestrial ground operations. Before we begin, I would like to thank our host, the Houston Museum of Science, for having us today in this distinguished lecture. I'd like to also acknowledge our host, our moderator, our panelists, the audience here today, for your commitment to be here today considering the events with the hurricane. To kick us off, I would like to introduce our moderator, Chris Colbert. Chris Colbert has spent more than 30 years developing technologies and systems for human spaceflight at the Johnson Space Center. He's managing the Commercial Lunar Panel Payload Services project at Johnson Space Center, where he's responsible for delivering NASA's payload to Moon using commercial service capabilities. Previously, Mr. Colbert was the chief technologist for Johnson Space Center, responsible for coordinating center strategies for technology. During his career, he has managed the development of advanced technologies in robotics, automation, avionics, and software for space shuttle, space station, and advanced human missions. As a division chief, he has provided system support for avionics, software, and other key systems for the International Space Station, Orion Commercial Crew. Mr. Colbert has also led the agency's human spaceflight architecture team, developing concepts for human missions to deep space, and led the Lunar Surface System Program Office. He has led center-wise teams to develop core information technology solutions such as consolidated networks and email systems. He started his career as a flight controller with the Mission Control Center, where he supported navigation analysis for more than a dozen shuttle missions. So please help me welcome our moderator, Chris Colbert.
Thank you very much. So all that data just tells you I'm old and I've been around a long time. I'm going to introduce, we have a wonderful panel tonight. Thank you all for coming. We really appreciate you being here. This is going to be a really interesting discussion. You're going to get a chance to hear from somebody other than the government about what's happening in the commercial market. And that's really, you're fortunate, you're kind of on the vanguard of something that's starting new, the opportunity for commercial companies to work at the moon. So let me bring our panel up. We'll get a chance to hear from all of them. We'll start with Dan Hendrickson from Astrobotic. Trent Martin from Intuitive Machines. Mahek Sarang from ispace. And Jonathan Wintrow from SpaceIL. So I'm not going to talk real long here. You all can go ahead in your seats and start sorting out mics. I'll just give you a brief history of what I'm running at NASA, because this is part of how the US government is trying to spur and create the opportunity for commercial activity at the moon. Obviously, NASA is planning human missions back to the moon through the Artemis program, but we're not quite ready for that yet. Prior to do that, we need to learn more about the moon. We chose to do that in a very different way than we've done previously. And through that, we're doing something called the Commercial Lunar Payload Service. It's a project I manage, which is paying commercial companies to deliver NASA payloads to the moon. We're not managing the missions. We're not managing the hardware or developing it. We're asking the companies to do that. And we want them to do that in their way. Don't follow the way the government does it. Do it your way. We hope to get lower prices, faster pace, and more innovation that way. And I can argue after 5 years, I think we're seeing that. The one thing I'll remind everybody is every one of these companies has already tried to land on the moon. Turns out landing on the moon is really hard. In fact, only one entity in human history landed the first time successfully. That's China. Intuitive Machines came pretty close this year. Real close. But landing on the moon is a very, very hard endeavor. These companies have all done it at a fraction of the cost of what NASA or China have been spending to send all their missions to the moon. And China, of course, hasn't sent humans yet. India has landed on the moon, and recently Japan landed on the moon. So we're seeing more activity at the moon. But I'm going to argue the vanguard of what's coming and the importance for the human long term is what these companies are doing, changing the way we get to the moon and allowing innovation and activities to occur in a fashion that doesn't depend upon either the government resources or the politics of the day, based on what the marketplace will support. And we'll talk some about that today. So I'm going to let Dan Hendrickson talk about Astrobotic first.
All right, good evening. Thanks very much, Chris, and thanks very much to ISU for hosting tonight's event. It's a real pleasure to be with you all today. My name is Dan Hendrickson. I'm with Astrobotic, an aerospace company based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We were founded back in 2007, and our primary motivation as a company is kind of encapsulated in the picture that you see here on the screen. Kind of says it all in a lot of ways. Astrobotic wants to enable the human future in space. We believe that future will be underpinned by space robotics, and we believe that the first place to start, the best place to start, will be at the moon. And so it's with that in mind that we're developing a portfolio of capabilities and services to make the moon accessible to companies, governments, universities, and nonprofits across the world. So when you look across the different product lines and different services that are on the screen, these are really emblematic of trying to provide cradle-to-grave end-to-end services for our customers. So starting all the way back on Earth, we have vertical takeoff, vertical landing, suborbital rockets. This allows our customers to be able to test some of their payloads on Earth in the Mojave Desert with entry, descent, and landing opportunities on terrestrial-like landers. We also, of course, have our lunar landers, and that's what we're primarily been known for, at least in the first few, really decade that we existed as a company. But we're really also looking to try to provide capability that extends to make not only transportation possible, but then also to make the best use of your time on the surface, ultimately. So we want to provide capabilities like sensing, mobility, as well as power, ultimately, and infrastructure. We want to make the return to the moon not just about sorties. We want to have sustained operation for science, exploration, and commerce, ultimately. So that's really what motivates us to have this full spectrum of capabilities that you see on the screen that really make up who we are. So while we got started with transportation and started with lunar landers, that's really just the beginning. Getting there is hard, as we all know. As Chris highlighted, it's very difficult. But ultimately, if we're going to make this return to the moon successful, make it truly inclusive, we're going to have other follow-on capabilities that the landers help enable. So we had our first lander mission. It happened back in January. Did not quite go as planned. Unfortunately, we did encounter a significant anomaly in flight. We had a valve failure. As you might hear in many space missions, valve issues are quite vexing for a lot of different missions, and unfortunately, we were victim to one. So this valve failure that we had in Peregrine Mission 1, which was carrying 16 customers from around the world, caused a rush of pressurant, helium, to enter our oxidizer tank and then caused ultimately a rupture in that oxidizer tank. So ultimately, we were not able to land on the moon without the full pressurization of the propulsion system available to us, and so we quickly pivoted the mission. We focused on sort of two primary objectives after it became apparent that we would no longer be able to actually make a moon landing attempt. One was to get payload data, and so we were successful in getting all the payloads turned on. In fact, throughout the mission, several of our customers have reported to us that they are actually able to get publishable science data from this mission going out into cislunar space and returning. So that was very useful. And then the second was to get as much data from the vehicle as possible with two ideas in mind. One, we wanted to try to understand, of course, the failure, which we did get a lot of data back. We feel like we have done a thorough job on our failure review board. We're actually going to be issuing some findings in the next few weeks publicly about exactly what happened and how we're going to correct it. But then also we wanted to get data on the subsystems of the vehicle because it might be funny to say, but everything else on the vehicle worked. And it was actually, all the other subsystems had a very successful mission. So we got a lot of great data that we can now move forward with for our future missions. This mission was, again, did not go as originally planned, but is very important now for leading into our next mission, which is the one you see here on the screen. This is the Griffin Mission 1, which is coming up. It's going to be carrying the NASA Viper rover, which is going to be looking for water ice at the south pole of the moon. Incredibly historic and exciting opportunity to go and get ground truth, actual data from the permanently shadowed regions of the South Pole. This mission not only will carry Viper, but it will also be an important mission at the larger, more medium-class lander delivery service that we're offering with Griffin, which can do about 650 kilograms to the lunar surface. And so this is much more of a workhorse vehicle that I think you'll see more in the future. And this is really also emblematic as a delivery is concerned of the kinds of deliveries that we're expecting to do in the future for things like our power grid that we're planning to do, which I'll highlight a little bit more. So this is really our workhorse lander that we'll look to employ as more sophisticated and larger payloads get to the surface, because as Chris highlighted, there is a huge demand for getting to the moon, and we're going to need larger and larger vehicles to get there and to do the job. So, as I mentioned, landers are kind of getting things started. That's the primary transportation, of course, of getting to the surface. But ultimately, Astrobotic wants to make the moon a place that is much more sustainable and provides operational capability to make use of that journey. Over the course of the last 14, 15 years that we've been in business, we've really come to appreciate that one lunar day is not enough time to really accomplish all the science exploration and commercial activity that all of our customers around the world ultimately want to carry out. And so in responding to that, we have really put our focus on developing lunar infrastructure, and namely power. So LunaGrid is a power infrastructure capability that we're developing. Makes use of solar towers. These are actually towers that are under development at the company right now. The towers themselves are actually the ROSAs that are from the ISS that are operating today. We're looking to now adapt those for the lunar surface. And the basic idea is that we utilize solar power at the South Pole. We do it with vertical arrays and then ultimately distribute that power using our small cube rovers as basically mobile power plugs. So imagine these small rovers driving around the surface tethered back to these towers, and they have wireless chargers on the front. All of these are technologies that are under contract today with NASA STMD or NASA CLPS, like in the case of Griffin. And this ultimate architecture that you see on the screen is under development today, and over the next 5 to 6 years, we're looking to deploy node after node of LunaGrid to start making the South Pole a location where you don't need one-off lander missions in order to operate, but rather you start to actually reuse assets, and you have time on assets. So you're not building a lander and buying a launch vehicle over and over again for just 14-day Earth missions. Ultimately, we can operate then hopefully for months at a time, if not indefinitely. So this is the future that we're all gearing toward, and this is ultimately what Astrobotic is looking to accomplish over time. But again, it all starts with transportation. And so that's what we're focusing on here in the immediate near term so we can get to this broader future that, again, you see on the screen. Thanks very much.
Okay, it's working. That's me, I promise. It was just 10 years ago. So ignore the gray hair. That comes because of a CLPS mission, probably. My name is Trent Martin. I'm the Senior Vice President of Space Systems for Intuitive Machines. Intuitive Machines, that doesn't sound like a lunar company. Well, that's because we weren't founded as a lunar company. We were actually founded as a think tank to take aerospace technologies out of NASA, out to other industries, in fact, to oil and gas and to medical. We're kind of sitting in the middle of the places that we thought that we would find business. And we did for around 5 years. And then I joined the company trying to beef up our space business. And we had about 40 people at the time. We now have over 400 people. I say it's hard to take space out of space people. They want to do space stuff. And that's what happened. We have a lot of former NASA, former government contract support for NASA, Goddard, NASA, JSC, that work for us. And we take those technologies and we implement them in new ways. So yes, we build moon landers and fly moon landers to the moon. I'm going to show you a video in a minute to talk about our first mission a little bit. But more importantly, we're building a space infrastructure company and looking to build the infrastructure in the cislunar space. So that includes data networks, it includes power systems, it includes landing capabilities, it includes the lunar terrain vehicle that we just won in April to put humans, to essentially provide a rental car for astronauts when they show up at their moon base, and to provide services for scientists who are interested in doing science at the moon. We have a contract at Goddard building satellite servicing satellites as well as other satellites for the Goddard Space Flight Center. And so our team has grown to, like I said, over 400 people, and we've diversified out from this very limited start, as we started off with the commercial lunar payload services, to now a very robust commercial company that is traded on the NASDAQ Stock Exchange. But let me show you a video talking a little bit about the IM-1 mission. Okay.
we turned our whole company towards attempting to land on the moon, to return the United States to the moon for the first time in 52 years.
Nova-C uses an environmentally friendly mixture of liquid methane and liquid oxygen.
Incredibly challenging thing like landing on the moon forced us to innovate.
Intuitive Machines has built an entire space program to support these CLIPS missions. The company completed its lunar lander in a new facility at the Houston Spaceport, just down the street from NASA's Johnson Space Center. It's an autonomous Nova-C class lunar lander named Odysseus.
Lunar lander arrived at Kennedy Space Center in Florida back in December. Since then, teams have been integrating the spacecraft to Falcon 9's second stage in preparation for launch.
Go IM-1 and the Odysseus lunar lander.
Falcon 9 has successfully lifted off from Pad 39A at Kennedy Space Center. An incredible sight to see.
Odysseus lunar lander separation confirmed.
Our Nova-C lunar lander has successfully separated from the second stage of the launch vehicle, autonomously commissioned, and made first communications contact with Nova Control. Yesterday, Intuitive Machines published the first IM-1 images, capturing our home as our lander drifted away towards the moon. These images are only a few of what our Nova-C class lunar lander actually sent to Houston. It takes a lot of planning, work, and a little bit of luck to get images like these. Payload integration managers programmed the lander's wide and narrow field of view cameras to take 5 quick images every 5 minutes for 2 hours, starting 100 seconds after separating from SpaceX's second stage. So, what we actually got back to Earth looks something like this. Out of all these images, the ones we chose to show humanity's place in the universe came down to 4 wondrous images that we hope inspire the next generation of risk takers. Right now, flight controllers are preparing planned trajectory correction maneuvers ahead of lunar orbit insertion.
Ignition, throttle pause, main stage, flaps 1, full thrust. Shutdown.
One team, you just executed a main stage maneuver with the most advanced engine humanity's flown in deep space. Congratulations.
You're taking a live look into Intuitive Machines' Nova Control in Houston, Texas, where flight controllers are preparing to start the landing sequence for the IM-1 mission. I'm Josh Marshall, Communications Director of Intuitive Machines.
And I'm Gary Jordan with NASA Communications.
2 to 10 kilometers, downrange, 1,100 kilometers.
TIG minus 5 minutes. We are standing by for powered descent initiation. 3 minutes to touchdown call from the mission director.
Confirm, that looked like a pitch over gimbal.
Sounds like we have some data that confirms pitch over. This starts the HDA process. That's hazard detection avoidance.
Less than 1 minute remaining to touchdown.
And again, that's the time of touchdown. It may take some time to actually confirm the status of the lander.
May take a minute for comms to reestablish standby.
There it is, mission director beating us to it. We've reached the expected time of landing, but now is the process of waiting for comms, and we are in standby mode, as you heard it from the mission director, Dr. Tim Crane.
It's picking up a signal from our high gain antenna and transmitter. It's faint, but it's there. So stand by, folks. We'll see what's happening here. All stations, this is mission director on IM-1. We're evaluating how we can refine that signal and dial in the pointing for our dishes. We can confirm, without a doubt, is our equipment is on the surface of the moon, and we are transmitting. So, congratulations, IM team. We'll see how much more we can get from that. Houston, Odysseus has found his new home.
An excellent call, and this is our team of Intuitive Machines mechanics and their families, their friends, everyone who has sacrificed so much to make it this far. Intuitive Machines has successfully soft landed the company's Nova-C class lunar lander named Odysseus on the moon, marking the United States' first lunar landing in over 50 years since Apollo 17. Before its power was depleted, Odysseus finished a fitting farewell transmission. Received February 29th, this image from February 22nd showcases the crescent Earth in the backdrop, a subtle reminder of humanity's presence in the universe. Good night, Odie. We hope to hear from you again.
He stomped our names into the lunar soil and kicked open the door for a thriving cislunar economy to follow by completely changing the economic barriers of entry for exploring the heavens. Technically, he's powered by the sun and methalox, but the truth is, Odie's heart is powered by the passion of every single mechanic to explore and discover, to push the boundaries of what's possible, and that's exactly what he did. I'd like to go hot mic all around the room and let Odie hear how much we love him.
I just had to share. There are 6 entities that have landed on the moon. 5 of them are countries. One of them was a little company from Houston. And we intend to do it again later this year. So watch out. If it's something crazy, we're probably doing it.
Hi, all. My name is Mahek Sarang, and I'm with ispace US, where I'm the payloads manager. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our company. We share a vision with all the panelists on tonight's panel. We really care about lunar exploration and opening up access to the moon for humanity. ispace US is headquartered in Denver, Colorado. We were founded in 2020 as part of Team Draper. We are one of the CLIPS contractors, and we are supporting CP-12, which will be a far-side lunar landing mission. We have about 100+ employees in our Denver office, and we're very excited to be expanding quite quickly as we prepare for our September 2026 lunar launch. So, as some of the other panelists as well, we actually had our start as a participant in the Google Lunar X Prize competition. And as part of that, we developed the Serato rover. So that rover actually won the Mobility Prize as part of Google Lunar X. And Hakamada-san tells this story. So he put together this rover, and he was actually doing this outside of Tohoku University in Japan. And once they had built the rover, they actually couldn't find any landers to take it to the moon. So we quickly pivoted and decided to start building a lunar lander to take the Serato rover to the moon. Since then, ispace headquarters or holdings in Japan has raised a really successful Series A financing round, which was actually the largest financing round, private financing round for Series A on record in Japan, which shows you the capital-intensive nature of the space industry more than anything. And since then, we have opened entities in Europe, in Luxembourg, which took on the mantle of developing our rovers, a lot in partnership with the Luxembourg Space Agency, which is very interested in lunar exploration as well and resource prospecting on the moon. And then in our ispace US entity, which is now supporting the CLIPS program. So our company is really emblematic, we think, of ISU's mission. We're a global company. We have headquarters in Tokyo, but we have a really established presence now in Europe and in the US. And we're really excited and proud to partner with not only government, but also private entities around the world. As part of our first mission, we actually took a rover for MBRSC, which was pretty nascent space agency at the time when they were developing that rover. So we were kind of growing up together, and that's kind of the story of ispace. You know, we, along with the other panelists, started out at a time when there weren't a lot of private entities doing such a crazy thing. So it's really exciting to see how much the company has expanded since then. But we still keep that global perspective in mind. So Apex 1.0 is our lunar lander that is being built and designed and manufactured in the US. It is a 300-kilogram class lander that will be launching on a SpaceX Falcon 9 from Cape Canaveral. We are going to be doing a lunar farside mission, and we'll be taking 2 lunar relay satellites as part of that mission, which will represent some of the first commercial relay satellites around the moon. We also have a huge list of planetary rovers that are being developed in Luxembourg of different classes that support, again, resource prospecting and exploration and mobility. Again, going back all the way to our founding as a Google Lunar X Prize participant and through the research, the R&D that was done at Tohoku University. So long history of planetary rover R&D that is now being launched as part of Mission 2 at the end of this year. So our X rover will be roving on the lunar surface in April or May of next year. So this also represents the 3 landers that our team is now developing. The Resilience lander is built to print copy of the Hakuto R lander that was launched in 2022 for the first time and attempted landing in 2023. We call it Resilience because we feel we have a resilience coming back from a failure on the first mission. Apex 1.0 represents a 10-fold increase on payload capacity from that first lander, and that's the one being designed and developed in the US. And our Japanese counterparts have now received a pretty significant investment from JAXA to develop the Series 3 lander, which will also be a very large capacity lander that will support JAXA's interests in lunar exploration. So we're very excited to partner with them and learn from their SLIM landing efforts earlier this year. So our first mission launched in December of 2022, actually marked the first private and commercially funded lunar lander launch at that time. This is Hakuto R in the fairing of a Falcon 9 SpaceX vehicle, which I always love this picture. It's pretty amazing. And similar to Astrobotic, we did not achieve all of our exploration objectives, but the mission itself was over 100 days of lunar orbit operations and transit operations, which is pretty remarkable for a private company, and actually represents one of the longest missions for a private entity. So the final descent operation, as you might have heard, was not successful. As we passed over a crater, actually our software misinterpreted an altitude decline due to us passing over a crater rim. And it actually read the correct altitude drop, but thought that it was an error. So it rejected those readings and executed a very perfect soft landing just a few kilometers from the actual surface. So CP12 is our CLIPS mission. We're very excited to be supporting Team Draper as the lander design agent. So we're partnering with Karman Space as well as General Atomics, who will be manufacturing and integrating the payloads on this mission. As you can see here too, this will be the launch of our Lunar Communication Relay Data Service. We're very excited to be partnering with Blue Canyon Technologies and developing 2 relay satellites that will allow us to operate and communicate with payloads and our lander on the lunar far side. We hope to be supporting many, many future missions for other providers and for our future missions as well, using those assets and our partnership with SSC, which will be providing ground stations. So that's our founding story. We're glad to be here.
Can you hear me? All right. So hi, everyone. My name is Jonathan. You can call me Yo. It feels a little bit like AA for moonlanders here. I do want to say, yeah, so I'm a co-founder of SpaceIL, and we too hard landed on the moon. But hey, every startup wants to make an impact. That's kind of, but we did it before it was cool, right? Before these guys. We did it in 2019. I wanted to tell a little bit about the story of the founding of SpaceIL because I think it's kind of relevant to a lot of folks here that is doing the SSP. So myself, I actually did SSP in 2009. I was in NASA Ames, and yeah, thank you. And that's when I heard about this crazy competition that was called Google Lunar X Prize, and the goal of that competition was to land a robotic mission on the moon. And I thought, hey, that would be cool to do that. And as you might know, SSP has this energy that makes you feel like you can do anything, right? So I took back that energy, and that's kind of what fueled me to hop in on this ship and say, let's do it, right? And I think that's kind of my first tip for those here that are doing the SSP is use that energy, right? You're getting great energy, great relationships, and you can take that risk now that you have experienced SSP. And I encourage you to do that. My second tip is that it requires a team. You can't do it alone. And it took a while before I met my two co-founders of SpaceIL in a bar, but that's a story that I'm willing to say later. But it takes a team to get to the moon, and you can see that this is kind of the teams of engineers and scientists that worked with us to get this moon lander up and ready to be launched. And it takes a long time. We started SpaceIL about 10 years before we actually attempted landing, and it took a while. The spacecraft was much different. It took a lot of resources. But the idea is you have to keep the dream going. You have to keep the vision that you guys have, whatever that is, and come and say, I'm going to pursue it through the end. And I think that this is one of the things that ISU teaches you, and I hope that you carry this with you as you go back from this experience. I also want to encourage you to think bigger than what it originally looks like. We started SpaceIL for the purpose of inspiring kids to pursue careers in engineering and science. And we set it up as a nonprofit. We're actually a nonprofit. And that allowed us to capture the imagination of kids, which is very important because you want these kids to go to learn science and engineering. Being, you know, a celebrity is great, but what rocket scientist is much better. And we wanted to inspire the kids to do that. And over the course of the mission, we reached over 1 million kids. And these kids were touched by people that worked on the spacecraft or volunteered for SpaceIL and went to speak to the students and to show them what is it like to build a spaceship, and maybe one day they can do it as well. I want to briefly talk about the next mission. So SpaceIL, we're working on having a dual lander. So it's a mission that has an orbiter and dual lander. And actually, we have somebody in the audience, I couldn't see you, is actually working on that mission and is also doing SSP. Raise your hand if you're here. Yeah, okay, great, yeah. So I think it's an exciting mission. We also learned from the mistakes of the past, and hopefully we can get it up and running in the next couple of years and get it to the moon. I wanna finish up with a call for the future, because I think that one thing that is incredible in this panel is that you would see that in a couple of years, getting to the moon is going to be something that you just do, right? So the question is going to shift from how we're going to get to the moon to what are we going to do there. And I want to encourage the people who are here in this forum to think about, you know, moon landing is going to be something that you can buy off the shelf. What would you do next? Now, I have my personal story about that. I can share with it over QA. But I want to encourage those folks here to think about, hey, what do you want to do on the moon? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, panel members. That's great. I'll go ahead and open up with a couple questions here, but I think we're going to have somebody come take one of the mics out to the audience. Is that right? Okay. Why don't we go ahead and, Yo, maybe give them that microphone to take out in the audience? Let you and Mehex share a mic. All right, so while we're waiting for the audience to be ready, let me go ahead and stage a question. Let's start with the interesting one that I want to learn about, and I expect you guys will all be interested in this too. Let's start with, what did you learn from trying to land on the moon? What are you going to do different? So Mehak, let's start with you.
Test. Yeah, that's a lot of the lessons learned. So a lot of the failure for this first mission came from, I mean, the anomaly that you saw, right? That's one thing also to remember, is that for all of us, I know that there were many more anomalies on our missions than the one that was either critical failure or whatever it was. So first of all, the thing that we learned was, what does our system do, right? As we're designing the system, as we're testing it, as we're learning about it, there's only so much that you have time to learn. So in the process of operating the spacecraft, what did we learn? We learned how the spacecraft works. We learned how our team works. So we learned, you know, what is the right number of people to have in an MCC, in a mission control center? What is the right SMEs to have, right, the subject matter experts to have in the room who can make the quick and tough decisions to keep the mission going? So that's number one. Based on the anomaly that we had, though, a lot of the work that went into the second lander, resilience, is to validate our software. So software has been a critical failure, a cause for critical failure for many, many missions. And it's actually interesting to go into the NASA you know, lessons learned database and see all of the failures that were caused by software. I think software is one of the most complex systems, and one of, in aerospace, kind of our blind spots. A lot of us are mechanical or physics background and don't have the experience with software validation and testing. So the things that we are learning is, creating digital twins, trying to do validation and testing of software algorithms in really representative environments. The thing that got us is that we were going over a crater, right? So trying to understand the environment that you're going to be landing in and trying to represent it as faithfully as possible is really a huge lesson learned.
Thank you. Dan, why don't you go?
Backup valves are a good idea. We are definitely going to be employing those. That's a very oversimplified, obvious answer, but it's the truth. But also, I think we through the entire experience of Peregrine, I think we really come to appreciate all the more how important it is to have a very close relationship with your supply chain. I think all of us on this stage do that, but one of the things that was really both heartening and also maybe not as good was that many of the things that we had insourced, they all just worked. We had full control over those things. Working with outside companies and other suppliers, you have to work very closely, hand in glove. And so that's something that over the last few years with the pandemic and all the supply chain issues, they were just exacerbated. But even in the best of times, you have to work very, very closely with the supply chain. And so I think having an even better relationship with your suppliers going forward is incredibly important. Because you can't just do all of those things, you can't have them all be in-house and have them be vertically integrated. Certainly there are companies like SpaceX that are doing great work doing that and trying to move to that. But the reality is in most cases, we're all going to have to keep working together. And so the relationships, speaking to maybe things for SSP takeaways, the relationships you build here in organizations like this as well as out in the industry are so important because you have to have a level of trust and working relationship that you can be able to achieve the milestones and the schedules and make sure that you're executing. So just having that very close formation flying with your supply chain is incredibly important for delivering on these missions, what we came to appreciate.
Thanks, Dan. Yo?
There's a lot of lessons learned, but I think that the biggest one is there's nothing like landing on the moon, right? You can try and do simulations and practice, but it is the first time that everything works together, and the speed of light and radio signals traveling the speed of light are too long for you to be able to control it yourself. So the entire thing needs to work the first time, which is hard. And that actually emphasizes how enormous the achievement was in the United States getting people there, right? So long ago. They didn't have the capabilities that we have today to do so. I think that the capability of making mistakes and saying, okay, let's do a first trial run, let's get to the moon. We know that there's a chance that the first mission is not going to go quite as well as we hoped, but we're going to do another one anyways. I think that is the key factor that is going to eventually make this a successful story. Because there's nothing that you can predict. You can't really predict how it's going to work out, but doing this for the first time, you learn a lot more than with a drawing board and some simulations.
Yeah, I will second that. It's very critical. NASA was extraordinarily fortunate back in the 60s with the technology available and how successful we were. But even then, we lost a crew on the ground, and we almost lost a crew in space, right? It's hard, and learning is critical. If you give up after your first attempt, you throw away all those lessons learned, right? Trent?
We literally watched every single one of these companies try to land on the moon. And we learned from things that they did. As in 2019, I remember specifically watching SpaceIL and saying, all right, we think this happened based on the failure that occurred. Based on that, let's make sure we do this. We had the same thing with ispace. Okay, we understand, and ispace was very, very open with here's what happened. We're going to publish and tell you exactly what happened. Okay, let's not do that. And Astrobotic was literally launched about a month before us, and as we watched it happen in real time, we were having discussions with NASA. How are you going to make sure that that doesn't happen to you? And I remember specifically saying, well, I can guarantee that's not going to happen to me, but something will happen to me. And it did. And you actually saw it in the video. The very first thing that happened, if you watch closely, Josh talked about, oh, here's the images that came back right as we released from the Falcon 9. We're not supposed to be spinning like that, but we were. It was a software issue, as usual. We had a setting that said if you receive this signal, it should be a 1. If it's not a 1, or within 0.001 of 1, ignore it. Well, that's a little tight. So 0.99 was probably good enough. Turns out we said, no, it had to be 0.999. And so we had to change that software setting within hours of releasing from the Falcon 9. The reality is we did what we call a hot wash about a month after the mission. We found 85 things that we would change. 85. 10 of which we had to change before we went to IM2 later this year. And we've changed those 10 things. We've actually changed around 50 of those things already. But 85 things that we would do better the next time. And so that's what we're doing. You're learning to fly a brand new vehicle. A brand new vehicle that's extremely complex in an environment that is unforgiving. And it's not just the transit to the moon. You get into the orbit around the moon. That is difficult enough. You're headed down to the moon. The environment that you find there is very, very challenging. When you get to the surface of the moon, now the temperatures are changing radically. We found at the south pole of the moon that you're bouncing signals off the surface of the moon and sending those to your dishes on the Earth. All of those things fed into issues that we found along the way. And despite what NASA would have you believe that failure is not an option, failure is always an option, right? Everything you do all the time is failing so that you learn and move forward, and that's acceptable. And you learn to accept that that's okay. We're taking some risk. I remember Chris specifically asking me before the mission, what do you think the odds are that you're going to successfully land? And at the time, I told him I thought it was around 70% until we did that first rocket engine burn in space. And once we got that, it would go to 90%. And at 90%, I was very happy. We got into orbit around the moon and realized that our laser altimeter was not hooked up properly. I realized that because I turned on the laser trying to measure to the surface, and the laser didn't come on. Turns out you actually have to hook up the bypass switch or it doesn't work. And we did that on all of our ground testing, but because it was a class 4 laser, safety told us, well, you can't fire that laser down at the Cape. You'll put somebody's eye out. Or maybe you should, because then you'll know that it works. And so testing is extremely important. It worked great in our tested lab, did not work with the flight cable. That was one of the 85 things. That was the one that got us, and why Chris said we were almost successful, in that we ended up falling over to the side because we didn't know how high we were above the surface. But I will say we built an incredible vehicle. It managed to not know exactly how high it was above the surface, landed over on its side at a 30-degree angle, and still sent back data for 7 days from the surface of the moon. So congrats to my team for building a vehicle that was extremely robust and was able to still send back data even after falling over to a 30-degree angle. So you learn a lot, but it's important that you embrace that for your next mission and you build that into your next system.
Thank you. And I will mention that one of the things that CLIPS was specifically created to allow was that idea that we would have some less than successful missions. We advertised it right at the very beginning of the CLIPS program. Our science administrator at the time was famously said, we're taking lots of shots on goal, recognizing that some of the early missions would fail, and that's how you learn. So I agree with Trent. If NASA is famous for Gene Kranz's line of failure is not an option, that was in a very specific set of circumstances. In this environment, failure you learn from failure. You learn a lot more from failure than unqualified success. So I'm confident at this point, all 4 of these companies have learned a lot. Their second missions will be probably much better. And that's how you get better at anything. You try something, you learn from it, and you move on.
Chris, maybe just to that point, I think one of the things that was really heartening for us was just seeing the team's response to crisis, too. Not only do I feel like we learned about our vehicle or our program, but I also think we understood what our team dynamic would be for future missions, because you have a flight plan, and then something happens, you get hit in the face, and suddenly you have to pivot, and you really see the ingenuity, and you really see the brilliance of your team really at work. And so that was another, I think, major lesson for us is, we have a great team, and I think we can still accomplish great things, even if it doesn't quite go exactly as we had planned originally. We want to keep that going in the future.
Yeah, it's a sign of depth and talent on the team that you can respond to crises, the anomalies, and figure out what to do and keep going. I think all 4 of these companies demonstrated that, and that's part of that lessons learned process is that, don't throw away that knowledge. Those people know more now. I'm going to ask one more question, then we'll turn to the crowd. All of you have different experiences of interacting with government agencies. What is the right role for government as this emerging lunar economy comes out? And what shouldn't government do? Let's start with Yo.
Well, I think among the teams here, we had the least amount of government support, right? And that actually came originally from the rules of the Google Lunar X Prize, right? We were supposed to do up to 10% of the funding comes from government, and we actually held to that. So the Israeli government did help us with funding and also in spreading the educational mission, but it was a very measured kind of support. The vast majority came from donors that saw the mission of inspiring kids to pursue science and engineering and gifted us almost $100 million for that mission. So I think that, though, that was not the right mix of government support. I think that what Eclipse is doing is actually a lot better in the sense that it offsets a lot of the concerns that a lot of early investors or donors have and come and say, the government is going to supplement that in order to bring the costs low enough such that companies can do this on a regular basis, because otherwise it's a one-off mission and then you need to start raising for another one. So I think, yes, the government has a lot of, a big role to play here in primarily pushing this and offsetting the costs of early missions such that more payloads can get to the moon, more payloads can afford doing that, and that inevitably is going to jumpstart this process to a sustainable level, hopefully, like it happened for launch industry.
And I don't know if it was you, Yo, or one of your compatriots, but some of the early Eclipse development people talked to SpaceIL and heard that message. that some level of government support is important to eliminate some of those barriers that the external funding isn't comfortable dealing with. Trent?
Most of you in here are aerospace professionals or seeking to be aerospace professionals. Aerospace wants to go to the moon, right? We want to go to Mars. We want to go do the fun, cool stuff that we all talk about and dreamt about as kids. The financial industry could care less about any of that. In order for them to put money into a company to go develop a new market, they need to see a potential return on their investment. What government can do is help to ensure that we have a steady line of revenue coming in that helps to feed an industry that's emerging, a nascent industry, before there's a large amount of money coming in from other industries. But the reality is, I don't want to be just taking NASA payloads and other aerospace company payloads to the moon. I want to be taking art projects and sponsorships and, who knows, mining companies. Whatever I can come up with, whoever will pay to deliver things to the moon and to do things on the moon, because that's how you create a market. What NASA has done with CLIPS is profound in that they're laying out, yes, we're going to become the anchor tenant, and we're going to do that for a long period of time, long enough that we can sustain an industry until either the industry makes, and there is an actual market that has been created. In NASA's case, they get a good group of companies that can readily deliver services to and from the moon. But in the end, maybe they can get it at a reduced cost because half of the cost is borne by other people looking to do other things at the moon. But that's how government can help set up an industry. It's the same kind of thing that happened in the airplane industry with the U.S. Post Office, buying services with airplanes delivering mail. It's the same exact thing. In this case, it's, well, how do we build this infrastructure around the moon? How do you create this new market? And the moon is only the stepping point. It's the pathway to the rest of the solar system. If we can do that at the moon, we can do that at Mars, we can do that at Europa, we can do that at all kinds of other places outside of what we typically think of as humans' realm. Why not? Why can't we do that? Why can't we go mine asteroids? You could if you had the infrastructure to do it. The infrastructure is just really expensive, and that's where the government comes in to help with that really expensive approach. But it's not the way the government has been doing it, where you just fund really, really expensive programs that die once you do it once, because that doesn't create a market. We're doing missions with less money than NASA spends in about a month on Artemis, right? And we do it over a 4 or 5 year period. We spend the same amount of money NASA spends in a month on Artemis. Now, I'm not saying that we can do Artemis for that kind of low money. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that you can create an infrastructure, you can create a marketplace, you can create an entire industry that can readily deliver you products and services from places like the moon or from asteroids. And you can do that at a very low cost as long as you say there's a regular stream of money that's going to come in over a long period of time. The financial markets then feed on that, and they give you money to allow you to build up your infrastructure, because they're expecting that they're going to get paid back at some point.
Mac?
Yeah, so I'm going to give a bit of like the pie in the sky answer, which is that governments, set visions and they create markets with humans involved. The pesky thing about making money is that you have to have humans. And one of the problems with the lunar economy is that we don't have humans on the moon. And the vision of ispace is really about supporting the development and sustainable presence of humans on the moon. The only entity that can lead that charge is a government. And I think the Artemis program is a really, really great example of that. Sustained support for a global vision where many different countries are coming together to support lunar exploration is really the most important role that NASA can play right now to support the development of humans on the moon. You see this in low Earth economy, right? For all of us who were born after 1996, right, we don't know a world where there weren't astronauts orbiting the Earth, which is pretty amazing for NASA to sustain that for so long. Because of that, we've had SpaceX. Because of that, we have now the ability for private companies to create commercial space stations. That never would have existed without NASA. And I think there's a similar role for governments to play in the development of buying down risk for human spaceflight and human sustained presence on the moon. Personally, I don't trust a private company to send me to the moon for the first time. I'm not going to sign up for that kind of risk. So I would appreciate if the government takes on the training, the development of services, the provision of life-enabling services on the moon. And from that starting point, then companies like us can provide reliable and low-cost transportation of products and services, and all of that will sustain and develop a cislunar economy. More near term and relevant to the programs that we're working on, I think governments can play a really big role in supporting commercial development, obviously through what Trent was saying for market development and sustaining, obviously, funding for really capital-intensive and expensive endeavors. But when I was traveling as a fellow for a year, I actually traveled to different countries and studied how governments support their local space economies. And people do it in very different ways. In the UK, for example, they create business innovation centers where they have access to facilities and subject matter experts, and there are a lot of companies that are actually based on economic parks that are sustained by the government, which is a totally different model, right, to kind of how we operate in the US, and really interesting. But NASA supports the US companies with access to subject matter experts, access to NASA facilities when necessary, through different models and through different funding mechanisms. But I think there's a greater role to play for the government, for example, to bring together these kinds of entities and commercial entities and partners to learn from each other and build on the experiences that we all have. So creating these kinds of forums, a lot of us have set the precedent, which is really amazing, for sharing information about how we failed and learned from those failures. But that is totally commercially led, which is really excellent. But I think NASA can play a greater role in bringing together those kinds of forums for us to discuss and build on the shared experience of private actors.
in kind of thinking about your question, Chris, I was thinking back to what Yo said earlier about kind of charging the audience and SSP group about what do you want to do on the moon once lunar transportation has become more regular. And you know, what I've come to appreciate in interacting with a lot of ISU alumni over the years who work at a lot of really great international space agencies, or they work with them in their home countries. I think one of the takeaways that I would offer about what government shouldn't do is we shouldn't be replicating capabilities. There's 4 lander companies here on stage. We don't need more landers. We need more capabilities to answer Yo's charge. What do we do once we have those transportation elements regularly moving? When we have trains regularly leaving the station, we should have a plan about where they're going and what their purpose is going to be. So I think, you know, as ISU alums coming up, as you're talking to various organizations and particularly governments around the world, let's ask ourselves, what are the things we should be focusing on once the transportation has been basically solved, because that's what's coming. It hasn't been solved yet, but it's coming. And let's not repeat the capabilities. Let's not have agencies go and stand up more lander programs. Let's figure out the follow-on programs.
All right, thank you all. That's excellent. Let's see if we're ready for some questions from the audience. I will tell you, we can't see you very well. It's pretty bright, so if you're going to ask a question, please stand up and introduce yourself, and then be loud so we can hear it. Let's use the microphones.
Hello. Thank you so much for the very engaging discussion. My name is Chintan. I'm a physician from Canada. My question is, I love the discussion about you need to have a track record of failing, which is what you learn from, which is incredible. However, how would you advise a startup that maybe does not have the funding or the resources available to fail multiple times while trying to build credibility? But let's say you're trying to build credibility, but if you fail multiple times, you kind of lose that credibility of achieving the success and meeting the goals, which was a point you had made earlier. So how do you reconcile those two for a startup trying to gain that traction, contracts, and the credibility in the industry? Thank you.
I think you see that in Elon, right? Elon does an excellent job of setting a very low expectation for the next launch of whatever vehicle he's planning on launching. He'll come out and say, it's 50-50 chance this isn't going to work. And then it doesn't work, and he'll say, that was a perfect success. It was great. It was wonderful. I think from a startup's perspective, you will never be able to be successful with every single thing you do the first time. And the amount of money that you get in this industry, we require a lot. This is a very capital-intensive industry. And so you need hundreds of millions of dollars to build the kind of infrastructure to build these kind of vehicles and to buy Falcon 9s or ULA Vulcans or whatever it is you're going to buy to launch it into space. Those prices come down, but it's still high. And so I believe that you have to set an expectation with your investors that's realistic. You have to talk about your successes. In the midst of failure, you can talk about the things that you succeeded with. And you heard that here today on the panel of we launched and we did these things and these were successful. And yeah, we had this one little issue, but all these other things were successful. And that's how you talk about it with your investors. But more importantly, you have to engage your investors in the community with ways that bring them into what you're trying to do. SpaceX has done an excellent job of that and really leveraged what NASA has done with paying them for missions early on and brought the price down. I mean, they're going to launch 150 rockets this year. It's unbelievable. And in fact, it's actually interfering with some of the things we want to do because they didn't increase the total number of processing capability down at the Cape. So they're like, well, you got to come for this window and you can't come in any other window because we're launching 150 rockets this year. But those expectations have to be set early and often with your investors, and they have to understand what it is that you're trying to achieve, what your ultimate goal is, and not just talk about the one thing. You don't put all your eggs in one basket, to use an American colloquialism.
Yeah, I guess just don't presume success. So one of the anecdotes that I always go back to, I was down at the Cape for our first mission launch, and I met the integration team, and they had just put the lander in the fairing of the rocket, and the next day they were flying back to Japan to begin integration on the second mission. They weren't waiting the 100 days to watch the lander get to the moon. They knew that they had to start executing on the next mission. So I think one of the really great success stories of ispace is that initially during the fundraising period, as Trent was saying, setting expectations correctly, we knew that we had to have multiple shots on goal. So the expectation was, even if mission 1 fails, we have a second shot where we know we're going to learn and do better, before we knew how we were going to end up on that mission. So I think that's a really important, especially in aerospace, having multiple shots on goal, fundraise for that expectation at the outset.
Do you want to take another question, or should I answer the same thing?
You want to add to that one? So I'll add one point. You know, you all have heard the story before. You know, how do you make a small fortune in the space business? You start with a big fortune. You know, Elon had a lot of money. It helps. This is what you all mentioned earlier. Something the government brings to the table is a lot of money. But yeah, expectation setting is critical, and interestingly, that applies in our world too, on the government side. Creating expectations is important. All right, let's see if there's, who has the mic? Somebody have a next question for us?
Good evening, and thank you for the lecture. My name is Mihaela Barbo. I'm from the European Space Agency, and I am a Romanian national. In May this year, my country signed an agreement with ispace for the first Romanian lunar payload in a non-existent space ecosystem in our country, with very limited space agency, national space agency support. What will you advise as private companies for the future startups and the future companies in small countries like ours to develop future missions or to be involved in such complex programs, knowing that is very limited support and financial support in the national programs? Thank you.
These types of companies are really your best opportunity to do exactly what you said, right? We offer the opportunity to fly for a very low amount of money to do a mission on the moon. And you can do that right now. The market price is anywhere between $800,000 and $1 million a kilogram. For a small company that has a couple $1 million, you can do a mission on the moon. And that's pretty incredible. And you can do that just by calling up one of us and saying, and you did, we'd like to fly a payload on one of your missions. And we find an opportunity. I know everyone here has had multiple, what we call commercial customers, but in reality, many of them are space agencies, sovereign space agencies from smaller countries. They're interested in flying a mission where they wouldn't have had that opportunity before, where they would have had to become a partner with ESA or become a partner with NASA in some way or win a contract in order to make that happen. Now you don't have to do that. You can literally fly a mission to the moon for a couple $1 million.
Yeah, I heartily agree, and I would also point out that as you're thinking about what to do with payload reservations, what to, like, if you're bought in on the idea that it makes sense to buy payload capacity with one of these companies, what do you do to then make the best use of that? I would argue that it would make sense to look at the Moon to Mars objectives, for instance, from NASA. It's a really helpful, specific document that outlines needs not just for NASA, but for basically the space enterprise in general. So it really does map out, I would argue, market opportunities and also exploration opportunities. And inherently, because NASA's saying, here's the things we think we're going to need over the next really 10, 20, 30 years, going from Moon to Mars, you can start to align your capability development with where the demand signals are going to be coming from. The NASA Space Technology Mission Director is going to have a similar document coming out based on inputs they've been receiving about all the different kinds of space technology needs that we're going to have as an enterprise in the future as well. That'd be another document to reference, because again, it helps kind of align to demand signals of what we're going to need in the future, and I think that'd be a great thing to cross-reference with whatever your payload plans are going to be.
I'm going to take a different view, and I think it's very easy, like when you're a United States, part of the United States, to take that view, the view that you guys present here. I would suggest take something that your country is really good at or really proud at doing and elevate it to the next level, right? This is how you create you take the benefits of the local economy that you're representing and bringing it forward. It's not really well known, but Israel is very good at making small satellites. And the reason comes from geometry. In the early days of the Israeli space program, the launches that Israel do is in the wrong direction, right? Israel does not launch towards the east, it launches towards the west where the ocean is. And that means that Israel cannot utilize the extra push from Earth rotation in getting more mass to space. So everything had to shrink and to be very small and weight efficient. I will just say that there's another argument, and that is in Hebrew, you write right to left, not left to right, but I'll let you be the judge. As a result, like what we did in SpaceIL, we said, let's build a very small lander, because the technology to miniaturize space exists in Israel already, because all the spacecraft that Israel did so far have been very weight efficient. We just wanted to take that one step further. And I think it went really well because it united a lot of people in this dream, in the ability to build something small that comes and represents the country in some sense. Although, you know, we're just private individuals, but in a sense, we also created this sense of kumbaya around this mission. And I think there's a big chance for a lot of nations to do so, with all due respect to the United States, right? But there's a lot of very small nations that can do that, and today you can do it fairly cheaply with one of us, I guess, and create a mission that would inspire your next generation of entrepreneurs, your next generations of students and scientists.
Next question.
So, hello everyone. It's my pleasure to meet you all here. I'm Ashutosh Mishra from India. I'm currently doing my PhD in Tohoku University Space Robotics Lab. So I have two questions. Firstly, from Mac ma'am, there is a lander and rover scheduled this year, but there is not much information out. So what are the insights? Like, it will be a scientific, what are the scientific observations it will do, or it will just testing phase? And my second question is from Martin sir. Many people don't know, but there is a honorary plate in Nova Sea lander dedicated to Swami Pramath from India. I want to know the relation, how from a saint from India got honored, or in the intuitive machine lander. So thank you.
Yeah, so our second mission, M2, is launching later this year in November. We will be taking not only an M2 rover that is being designed by Luxembourg, so that rover is mostly a technology demonstration of our actual rover technology. There will be a second flight of that rover, which will do more scientific observations, and actually will be partnered with the Romanian payload that was mentioned earlier, looking at mobility and localization of assets on the lunar surface, which is very critical for us to be able to do, for example, resource prospecting. So a major, major push from ispace's perspective. We believe that the future is in space resource utilization, in situ resource utilization, and this rover mission is meant to demonstrate the first and primary technologies to enable that. So not only mobility, but also imaging and processing of data that is returned from that rover to characterize and identify resources. So that is the primary mission. We also have other really exciting payloads that will be going, including an algae experiment, so kind of an early bio experiment that is being developed by a Japanese company as well. So I invite you to learn more about those.
For those of you not familiar with the United States and how we were founded, one of our founding tenets is freedom of religion. We have a lot of different religions in this country. One of the other things that we do in this fledgling nascent economy is barter things. And so we actually had a company who was founded by an individual from India whose guru was from India, and as part of the barter arrangement, it was, we'd like you to put this onto your lander. Why not? We can do that. And so we had a lot of things on the lander that that were either bartered or an agreement where we would put some kind of an image on the lander. Maybe somebody came and blessed the lander. A couple different religions came and blessed the lander. So we just take every little bit of extra push that we can get to get all the way to the surface of the moon. And because of that, the Prime Minister of India tweeted about our landing. And so those little things come back to you, and so we decided that was something that we were going to do, and it was an agreement between Steve Altemus, the CEO of our company, and a CEO of another company in the Washington area that got that onto our lander.
All right, next question. Hello, everyone. My name is James Fettis from Australia. Thank you all so much for your time tonight and this really invigorating discussion. I'd like to jump off of Chris's last question about the role of government, and clearly that sort of anchoring tendency and driving costs down is really important at this stage of the cislunar economy. But I'd like to hear from each of you about some of the private or non-governmental payloads that you've attracted so far, and where you see the cislunar economy growing first as those prices come down and it becomes more affordable.
Around 25% of our revenue right now comes from non-government contracts, non-CLPS contracts. Some of them are ride shares that go along with us. We buy the entire Falcon 9 and we sell we don't use it all, so we sell the rest in ride shares. Some of them are payloads that are going to the surface. I've sold everything from sponsorships with Columbia Shirt Company that also included a payload on our lander, to an art project that included a sculpture from a world famous sculptor who wanted to put his piece of art on the moon, and now you could buy a copy of that, of one of those spheres that's now on the surface of the moon. And I think for around $2.5–3 million, you could own it, and then I get a little share of that. So there's all kinds of different things that we're finding. We're finding commercial companies that are interested in testing out equipment. We're finding academic universities that have an endowment and they want to do some kind of a scientific experiment. And then we're finding government agencies that are in other countries that are our commercial customers.
Yeah, we have a variety of different organizations that are on our manifests. I think one of the themes that we have seen from the market that's not government connected, I'd say, is resource interest. And there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of slice that, but I'd say a lot of interest in particularly water ice and the potential opportunity to utilize that. And there's a lot of different potential verticals there. There is also some interest in rare earth metals. It's a little bit more further in the future probably, but water ice is a very interesting and potentially very interesting topic for ISRU in the future. And we're excited about the Viper mission, for example, because it can go down into the permanently shadowed regions and get some ground truth measurement of how much water ice is there, how difficult might it be to actually extract and utilize. And so we're seeing, I think, follow-on interest from folks that are going to be watching that mission very closely.
Yeah, I mean, not much to add other than, yeah, we have similar portfolios for commercial customers. And I think, to echo Jonathan, I think the real change has to come when we have visionary applications on the moon. And we're still kind of missing that from the market. And from when the private market provides, I think, some signals, and that's, first of all, cost of launch. So when we bring that down even more, and we're able to unlock new markets, I think that'll be truly emblematic of what people's ambitions are for commercial applications on the moon. When I was based at a university, we were trying to raise money for lunar payloads at the time. And it turns out the barrier of entry for a lunar payload is still really high, even for a university that is very well endowed. We were only able to manage about 1 or 2 kilograms, which is flying on IM-2. And that 1 or 2 kilograms is really not enough to demonstrate, again, market-defining or changing applications, commercial applications on the moon. Because, again, that private investment, even from universities, is still not there. So I think we're going to start seeing, and hopefully some of the people in this room will start creating some of those new applications, especially once the people who are on this panel, we're responsible for getting that cost down to a place where it allows new entrants into the market.
I want to add on to, in the spirit of what you just said. I think that the interesting market is coming, or can come, and should come from outside this space industry, right? As soon as you get some folks outside to begin saying, wait a minute, I can do that on the moon? That opens up so many possibilities. I think when you start hearing that, this is where you can jumpstart this economy and bring these new applications. And I think Colombia is a great demonstration of that. You know, I have a peat project around growing chickpeas because I love hummus, right? And as soon as we can get you know, commercial hummus manufacturers to come and say, yeah, you can grow that on the moon, why not? And I think that's kind of where we're going to see this kind of change. And I think we're just on the cusp of that actually becoming a possibility. And I'm hopeful that it would become a reality over the next couple of years. So it's pretty cool to actually see it unfold.
Let me add on to that Columbia comment. So Columbia took a chance on us, right? They're a privately held company. They paid for a logo on both IM-1 and IM-2. They paid to put a payload on, so they actually are testing the lining of their jacket as a new aerospace product. And we actually are using it. It actually works really, really well. And it's very low cost because it's made to be a lining of a jacket that they sell at, you know, the sporting goods store. But the amount of publicity that they got out of the IM-1 mission was pretty staggering. It actually equated to around $9 billion worth of purchasing power that they would have had to have bought in the marketing industry. It equated to 300 billion eyeballs, and I know there's only 8 billion people on the planet, but if you multiply that out, the amount of times that you would have seen something about IM was 300 billion times you would have seen something about that mission, and all of them had that Columbia logo on it. So the marketing power is incredible. Now, maybe that's because it's the first mission, and maybe that tapers off. But think about that from a marketing perspective. That's completely out of the aerospace business, right? Or the artist that can sell $100 million piece of art. Think about that from an aerospace perspective. If you had a piece of that, if you had 10% of that, that's a lot of money. I can start doing something with $10 million. And so those industries have to come in. We have to get people outside of aerospace.
Next question.
Hi, Justin Park, United States. I was hoping you guys could elaborate more on the payload side, some kind of experiment or instrument or extremophile that was on one of the previous landers.
No comment on that one. I can say actually the weather bears got a lot of attention, so I can say about that. So that was not intentional, right? We did not know about those hidden payload that was taken with us to the moon, and that's actually not cool, right? You're not supposed to do that, and we had to put measures to prevent that from happening next time. We did take, in the first mission, we did take a time capsule with us, which I thought was really important. So to capture the imagination and inspiration for kids. And by the way, I'm sorry for deviating here. Let me go on the limb here. So one of the things that we did for the first mission was very successful. We took selfies of people from all around the world and put them in a time capsule. Now, since this is SSP, and you have a lot of moon power here, should we take a selfie and the first one to get to the moon take this with them? Yeah, are you down for that? Okay. All right. All right, I'm volunteering my camera for this, but if we get some lights on the audience, we'll do it right now at the end. Yeah, okay, let's do it. Why not? So if you can get some light on the audience and you can take a picture.
Sure, we can do a picture. Electrons are pretty light.
Right. Yeah.
You know, while we're getting that up, I'll answer a partial question. Part of what you're going to hear is that particularly for the commercial payloads, there's not a lot of data the vendors, the companies can share because those are part of their agreements with the commercial entities. I can talk about the NASA payloads because those are government bought. Those cover, we've actually manifested not just on the first couple missions, but across all the missions. We are now up to 9 missions chartered to the moon off of NASA, over 40 different payloads, mostly science instruments gathering data about the environment of the moon or gathering information about landing on the moon, data like that. But a handful of tech demos as well, things that demonstrate what could happen when we take larger landers to the moon. We're very interested, for example, in plume effects. What happens when you come down and landing on the moon, you blast with your rocket engines, that plume goes out. On the moon, there's no atmosphere. That stuff scatters everywhere. We want to know where it goes, what the velocity is, what the energy is. Data like that is part of what we're doing a lot of manifesting on so we can learn more about going to the moon. I love Yo's idea of getting a picture. Taking it to the moon would be cool.
At the end, okay.
All right. We've got time for, I think, 2 more questions.
Okay. Hello, good evening. My name is Francesca from Italy. So I have a question about, so how do you coordinate when it comes to landing? Because of course you mentioned it's quite challenging. It's one of the most challenging part, EDL, and when you have to also take into account that you have to have some margin since maybe you flip or don't end up where you wanted to, and given that the areas of interest on the moon are limited, how much does the work of other companies impact your work? And so I'm wondering, about that. Of course, for the safety of your own spacecraft, so lander, how much does that play a role? How do you communicate about that? Thank you.
So we were asked to move our landing site on IM-1. We were going to land in mid-latitude. On the first couple of missions, ours and Astrobotic's, NASA didn't assign a landing site. They just said the moon is their landing site. Go land on the moon. Partway through, NASA said, we changed our mind. Can you land somewhere near the South Pole? And we did. But we coordinated with NASA. So NASA essentially, for the CLPS vendors, is helping decide. So we'll tell them we want to land here, and they say, yeah, you're good with that. Sometimes they say, no, we don't like that one. And that has happened to us a couple of times on our landing sites. And sometimes it's because he's landing nearby and we didn't want to interfere with the science that's happening with his lander. Or, the State Department thinks that some other country is planning on landing in this area, so you need to avoid that area. So we have to get licensing in the United States to do a space mission, and those go through various entities, one of which is NASA, but there's other entities as well. And all of that has to be coordinated in the United States, at least, through various government agencies. I don't know how that works for SpaceIL.
So we got a call from NASA saying, please get away from Apollo 11, right? Just anything you do, just not next to that, right? So that came really early on. I think every Google Lunar X Prize, I remember specifically there was a team conference that they gathered all the Google Lunar X Prize in one room and said, stay away from Apollo 11, right? We don't want you to accidentally do anything around that. But except for that, it was purely to try to understand the science, and we had some small experiment for the magnetic field, so there was no point in that. I think the most important part of a lander, of the landing site in the early mission, is you want a very flat area, very large, no craters, no mountains. They learned the hard way, and I think that dictates the selection of the landing site. Luckily, there's enough space on the moon so far to do that. Obviously, you want to be cautious about not to scatter stuff around, and be cautious for future missions that are going to come after you. But I think right now coordination was not a big aspect of us. Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, for our first mission, actually the coordination that was more important was in orbit. So lunar orbit is actually more crowded than you would think, and there's a very small amount of stable orbits that are useful for orbital assets. So we had quite a few, I think, conjunction events, potential conjunction events that we had to coordinate with NASA assets. And that will become more frequent and more necessary as there are more missions and as people like us, like ispace, decides to put 2 lunar orbiters right into lunar orbit. And for that, I think there's also not a great precedent, for example, of graveyard orbits or how to dispose of lunar orbital assets in responsible ways. You know, there's no requirements on lifetimes of those orbital assets or analysis, for example, of space conjunction in lunar orbit. So I think as there are more missions, as there are more landings, as there are more orbital assets, that will become more and more important.
There is a great precedent that space is not big, which was the mindset of the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And so we are actually coordinating that, in the United States anyway. We coordinate all of those conjunction events, not only in LEO and GEO, but all the way out to the lunar distance. We talk about all the assets that are out there that we know about and make sure that we don't have conjunction events. And I know NASA has been very involved with the discussion of how do you ensure that you don't contaminate important sites on the moon? How are you ensured that you dispose of your vehicles in a way that will help sustain that environment for the long term?
We have time for one last question.
Hi, my name is Prathamesh and I'm from India. My question is, how can commercial organizations, particularly in the field of space exploration, strike balance between the commercial objective, such as profitability and market share, with their scientific exploratory goals, which includes advancing human knowledge, conducting research, and exploring new frontiers?
So I'll start that, and I'll give you a government perspective, which will differ a little bit from a commercial perspective. I would argue to some extent one of the roles of the government is that exploration, that set of objectives, which may not have a return on investment other than increasing human knowledge. And that's a natural role for governments to play and to sponsor and to support. But it has to go hand in hand with commercial objectives which allow the marketplace to emerge.
I think I might answer the question from a different angle in that one of the interesting experiences that we've had engaging with the market is that we've actually seen folks that have brought forth new scientific questions that they want to have explored with a payload. In the US, you have the decadal surveys, which sort of set the priorities of all the different kinds of activities that you're going to pursue for particular payloads for the Science Mission Director at NASA. But there's still other science questions that are out there that are also important. And so there's folks that actually want to contribute with their own funding to pursue those questions and to pursue science and exploration on their own dime and with their own pursuits. So I would actually argue that there's an opportunity now to actually grow the overall opportunities for more science through those commercial opportunities rather than them inherently necessarily being at odds.
Yeah, so in my mind, science equates to data, and the question with data is always, should it be shared or sold? And there's a lot of precedent in commercial Earth-based markets for that question and how that's evolved through Earth observation, through weather product developments. So there's companies on Earth, for example, like Spire or Planet, that have had a lot of success in creating commercial products, but then those commercial products get bought by government agencies and then shared as public data. Because we believe, for example, that weather data, especially for extreme weather events, like I wouldn't want to know if there's going to be a hurricane in Houston before I come here 3 days ago, right? Things like that we feel like should be publicly available and made free, right? So I think that question of what you asked, right? We have a lot of conversations about this when we are collecting really important scientific data because we are some of the first actors on the moon. What are we going to do with that data when we get it, right? For example, it's really useful for us to hear that India, when they landed on the South Pole, found that the terrain was quite different to what they thought they were going to experience when they landed. And those kinds of things, those products, that data that will become more and more rich and more frequent with more missions, I think we will have to start having conversations with governments about what data should be made publicly available and what data should be sold as commercial products.
The mining industry actually utilizes, the mining and the oil and gas industry utilize a method where they will go out and do surveys They gather up data. They make parts of that data, like maybe a very wide tolerance piece of that data, available to everybody. And then if a company or a government wants to have the more concise data, they can buy it, right? So there are analogous options that we can use, and I think that we will drive that direction, because we're seeing this idea that if we invest our own private money, or our own investor money, in some kind of a mission, and we go gather a bunch of data, giving that away for free does not bring more money into the company. But finding ways that you can share some of the data without sharing all of the data, but if you can say, hey, NASA, I'll give you 20-meter resolution data on this for free, but if you want the half centimeter resolution, we'll give you that at a price. That's something that I think we should look at as an industry, because I agree, it's important that people get it, but it's also important that we sustain companies, and so it's a delicate balance.
I want to say that company is not the only way forward, right? So if you're starting a company, then your charter is to bring back more money than investors put in your company, and that makes it such that your first priority is to sell, not to do research, right? In SpaceIL, we chose the other path, which was to do it as a nonprofit, primarily because we didn't think that we can make a lot of money doing that in that time, right? I'm talking 2009. So I think that's also an option, right? If you think that the research is more interesting and you can convince donors that this is something that is worthwhile in giving money to, then maybe a nonprofit is the answer rather than a commercial company. And nonprofits can also get to the moon, so why not?
I'll add to that. Yo's right. There are actually there's a fair number of precedents of nonprofit type entities sponsoring and supporting research activities. There's no reason that couldn't happen at the moon too. All right, so let's thank the panel for all their support tonight. Thank you all. And thank you for your questions and your participations. You all had some excellent questions. We really appreciate that. It makes it interesting for us up here to have an interesting dialogue. I think I'm going to turn over to Claudia now.
You want to do the picture? Yeah, do you want to do the picture?
Let's how are we going to do it? Can we get the lights on in here?
No, it's fine. I mean,
it
is going to the moon, so you might as well do it in high quality, right?
Yeah.
So,
All right, thank you, Chris. And please, another round of applause for our great panelists and moderators. We're living very exciting times of ambitious goals for the future of space exploration, and it's great to hear from the companies that are commercializing the capabilities that will be enabling us to complete these goals. So thank you for being here, for sharing your insights with the participants, and hopefully you have inspired some minds today. So as a token of your appreciation for your support, we have a couple gifts for you. Thank you for being here. Okay, so a couple logistics aspects. We're going to go outside. We have the ISU flag, and we're going to take a picture together as a group with the panelists and the moderator. And then you can join us right here to your left. We have a small reception, and you can continue to ask our great panelists some more questions. Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.